Consider what just happened. The mail carrier did not make a careless mistake. They checked the name. The name was correct. It said judge. They delivered to the courthouse. Every individual step followed the rules. The error was in which piece of information was treated as authoritative. The name was checked. The address was not. Now consider a system that accepts an authentication token. The system checks the signature, valid. It checks the claims. The subject field says the right username. It grants access. What it did not check was whether this token was issued for this system by an issuer this system should be trusting, through a flow intended for this purpose. Every individual check passed. The system granted access to the wrong thing, or granted the right thing to the wrong requester, because it was checking the right fields, but not all of them. It trusted a genuine piece of information, in a context where that information alone was not sufficient to establish the correct identity. That is identity confusion, not forgery, not theft, not a broken cryptographic operation. A system reaching the wrong conclusion about who it is dealing with because the signals it evaluated were genuine but incomplete, or because two different identities share enough attributes to be mistaken for each other in a specific context. It is one of the harder classes of identity attack to reason about because the artifacts involved are often entirely legitimate, and it is one of the more productive ones for attackers because the defenses require understanding something most systems were not designed to question. Am I certain that this identity, in this context, is actually the one I think it is? Identity confusion arises from a specific mismatch between how systems represent identity and how they use it. Every system that makes identity-based decisions selects a subset of an identity's attributes to evaluate. Not every attribute that would be impractical, just enough to answer the question at hand. Username to check who you are, group membership to check what you can do, a certificate common name to verify which server is responding. The selection of which attributes to check is a design decision, usually made with the common case in mind. And in the common case, those attributes are sufficient. The username is unique. The group is specific enough. The common name matches only one server. Confusion enters when the selected attributes are no longer sufficient to uniquely identify the right entity in the current context, either because a different entity shares those attributes in a way that was not anticipated, or because the context has shifted such that the same attribute means something different to different systems in the same interaction. There are three distinct mechanisms through which this happens in practice. Each exploits a different assumption about what makes an identity distinguishable. The first mechanism is namespace collision, two identities that share the same identifier within a system that treats that identifier as uniquely authoritative. The clearest example is account merging during an acquisition or a migration. Company A uses email addresses as usernames. Company B uses email addresses as usernames. The two systems are federated. A user at Company A has the email address alexnorgan@companyaa.com. A user at Company B, after the merger, ends up with the email address alexnorgan@companyaa.com through a provisioning decision someone made without checking for conflicts. Now the authentication system receives a token asserting the identity alexnorgan@companyaa.com. Two completely different people, with different roles, different access levels, different histories in each company's system, share an identifier that was assumed to be unique. The system has to guess which one the token refers to, and its guess is determined by whatever logic it uses to resolve identifier collisions, which may not have been written with this scenario in mind. Namespace collisions also occur within single systems when identifier namespaces are reused. A user account is deleted. Some months later, a new user is created, whose automatically assigned identifier happens to match the deleted one. If any system in the environment stored references to the old account, in access control lists, in audit logs, in resource ownership records, those references now resolve to the new user. The new user inherits associations they should not have. The old user's audit trail becomes ambiguous. This is identifier reuse, and it is a specific form of confusion that most systems do not protect against by default because identifiers are assumed to be permanently unique once assigned. That assumption is almost never architecturally enforced. The second mechanism is context mismatch, a valid identity claim evaluated in a context different from the one in which it was established, producing an incorrect access decision. Federated authentication is the most fertile ground for this. An identity provider issues a token asserting that the user is a member of the administrator's group. In the identity provider's context, that group has a specific meaning. It refers to administrators of the identity provider itself, people authorized to manage users and policies within that one system. A service provider in the same federation receives that token, reads the administrator's group claim, and maps it to its own administrator's group, which in its context means full access to the service's data and configuration. The claim was genuine, the group name was accurately stated, but the same string carried a completely different meaning in two different systems, and the service provider treated the identity provider's internal administrative context as if it were its own. This class of confusion is sometimes called claim interpretation mismatch, and it appears consistently in post-incident reviews of federated system compromises. The token was valid. The signature checked out. The claims were accurately stated. The problem was that the receiving system interpreted a claim according to its own vocabulary without verifying that the issuing system's vocabulary matched. OAuth scope confusion operates on the same principle. An access token issued for a limited scope, read access to user profile data, is presented to an API that does not enforce scope validation rigorously. The API checks that a valid token exists and grants the request, treating the presence of a valid token as equivalent to authorization for the requested action. The token was issued legitimately. It was never authorized for this action. The API did not check. The third mechanism is principal confusion. A system acting on behalf of one principal while a different principal's authority is implicitly applied. The clearest technical expression of this is the confused deputy problem in cross-origin web security. A browser makes a request to a third-party site. That site instructs the browser to make a follow-up request to a different origin, one that the browser happens to have active credentials for. The browser dutifully attaches those credentials. The receiving server sees a request from an authenticated user and processes it. The user did not authorize that request. The user did not know it was being made. A third party exploited the fact that the browser automatically associates credentials with origins, and issued instructions that caused those credentials to be applied to a request serving the attacker's purpose. Cross-site request forgery works on exactly this mechanism, the confusion between which principal is actually authorizing an action and whose credentials are being used to execute it. In service-to-service communication, the same confusion appears when a service has broad authority and accepts instructions from callers without verifying whether those callers are authorized to direct it. A highly privileged internal service that processes requests on behalf of external-facing services may be designed to trust requests from within the internal network. An attacker who can make requests appear to come from inside, through server-side request forgery, through a compromised internal service, through a network position that gives them access to internal channels, can instruct the privileged service to take actions using its authority, not the attacker's. The privileged service is not compromised. It is doing exactly what it was built to do. The confusion is about whose instructions it should be following, and whether it has any way to verify that the instructions come from a legitimate principal with the authority to issue them. What makes identity confusion unusually difficult to detect is that it produces no error signals whatsoever. A brute force attack generates failed authentication events. A forged token fails signature verification. A revoked credential produces an access denial. Each of these leaves a trace, something that looks wrong in a log, something that a detection rule can fire on. Identity confusion produces successful events. The token was valid, the signature passed, the access was granted. From the system's perspective, everything worked correctly. The incorrect access decision looks identical, in every log, to the correct one it was supposed to be. Detecting it requires knowing the ground truth of what the correct decision should have been, which requires comparing the access decision against external context that most logging systems do not capture. Which identity provider issued this token? What did the issuer mean by this group name? Was this service meant to receive tokens issued for this audience? Was this request actually initiated by the user whose credentials were attached to it? These questions are answerable, but only if the system was designed to capture and retain the context needed to answer them. Most are not. The log shows what happened. It does not show what should have happened. The gap between those two things is where confusion lives. Reducing identity confusion risk comes down to one principle applied in multiple places. Every identity attribute used in an access decision should be evaluated in context, not in isolation. Audience validation in tokens, checking not just that a token is valid, but that it was issued for this specific service, closes the context mismatch gap for federated flows. It requires one additional field check and eliminates the entire class of attack where a token issued for one service is presented to another. Namespace isolation, ensuring that identifiers are unique not just within a single system, but across all systems that share identity information, prevents collision attacks during migrations, mergers, and provisioning. It is an architectural constraint that is far cheaper to impose at design time than to retrofit after a collision has occurred. Claim vocabulary agreement, explicit documentation and validation of what specific claim values mean in each system's context, and rejection of claims whose meaning is ambiguous, closes the interpretation mismatch gap. This requires coordination between teams rather than a code change, which is why it is consistently the last thing done and the most frequent source of federation-related incidents. And for principal confusion, the fix is explicit authorization on every delegated action, designing systems so that they verify not just that a request is technically valid, but that the principal who originated it had the authority to make it. This is more invasive than the other fixes, because it requires rethinking how trust is delegated through chains of services. But it is the only approach that addresses the root cause rather than the symptoms. Identity confusion does not require a broken system. It requires a system that is checking some things correctly, while not checking others at all. The token is valid, the signature is genuine, the username matches, and the system still ends up trusting the wrong thing, because validity in isolation is not the same as correctness in context. The defenses are not technically complex. Audience validation, namespace isolation, claim vocabulary agreement, explicit delegation chains. What they require is not clever engineering. It is the habit of asking, for every identity-based decision a system makes,